Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Friday, which means it's time for a new How to Bass. And today I'm giving away a whole bunch of wavetables, and here's one of them. These are wavetables that are made of sounds that I recorded while I was at SeamlessR's studio with his ridiculously huge collection of analog modular synths. There are 8 of them? 9 of them? There are 9 of them. And I will play for you all of them, and then they'll be available for download in the description if you want them. And then I'm going to give a gigantic discussion about modular stuff in general, as well as showing off a couple of the sounds that I recorded while I was there. So, I mean, it's not really, this is going to be difficult because in the future, I'm going to have modular synths, and I'm going to be making awesome sounds with them. And normally how to basses are all about, how to make a sound, and I can do that. Being like, oh, you do, this is why, and that kind of thing, but it's somewhat of a limitation when you're sort of unable to get thousands of dollars worth of hardware. Sorry. Anyway, this is what this one sounds like. A lot of these are actually like what I would consider Reese modulations. Like if you have a Reese and it acts like that kind of thing. I recorded one of those kind of wobs, and that's what a lot of these are. This was a bandpass modulation. It kind of sounded like a hardstyle kick when I heard it. It was a little weird. Nice little soft sounding one. Probably my favorite one of all of them. It's funny that when we get to the actual discussion about modular synths, the one of the things I want to talk about is the idea that some of these things are things that you could pretty easily make reasonable analogs of in the digital world, with some effort and that kind of thing. But the thing is, though, like this particular one, with how it sounds, it's normally a lot more work for me to do something like that. And with the analog stuff, with the particular setup that I had, which was for what I used of the gigantic selection that was available in Clayton's place, I used a pretty minimal setup because I wanted to kind of get my bearings on all this stuff. And it was easy. Oh, nice Reese one. Remember this one, because this one will have an interesting discussion later. It says 2A because I wasn't sure if it was going to work when I did it. Another Reese modulation, but a pretty short one. So those are the tables that are available down there. These aren't really, I didn't really work too hard to make sounds with them because I feel like people will do a pretty good job with just the bare tables. So that's the portion of this video where I actually show you the sounds that you're going to have with the content that I've given you. And now begins a long discussion about analog stuff. And if you care, now is the time to continue caring. So, a week ago, I went to Seattle to do the Creative Live class on audio synthesis, which was primarily focusing on learning all the intricacies of digital synthesis. And I went immediately afterwards to Detroit to hang out with the Fixed crew and mess around with SeamlessR's analog stuff. So, that's kind of interesting how that worked out. I never actually thought about that until just now. The idea that I went as a sort of a champion of digital synthesis and then just sort of switched sides. Anyway, the big thing about analog synthesis is its sort of dedication to FM as a process. I feel like just a big part of that, like a big part of it, how the sounds that are made and the cool things you can do with it are really primarily FM based. And you might be thinking, well, cool, I just do fucking digital FM, that's fine. If you ever looked at any video that I've ever done about digital FM, including, mostly the basic ones where I sort of talk about like the process as a whole, you'll remember that I brought up the fact that it's not like analog FM. Digital FM modulates phase because for some reason in the way that we process things, we cannot modulate pitch directly the way that we can with the analog world. Now, also in the analog world, there's pure electricity, just voltage. There's no latency. The limit is like this is the speed of light. And before we even get anywhere near there, or we wouldn't hear things anymore. you can plug anything into anything because of this. Like the principle. Let's give it. Okay, this is becoming a primer on how modular synthesis works. And to show you how this works, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you what a modular system looks like. And, oh my god, and I'm going to explain sort of how the process works. It took a little bit of understanding for me to kind of grasp this. What is this? Ooh. Alright. So this is, the whole point of modular synthesis is really just regular analog synths. Like, there's analog, there's preset analog synths, like, you know, a Mini Moog, or a Voyager, or a Sub Fatty. I don't know much about synths, to be honest, so don't quote me on this. But the whole point of the idea is that the chain is set up into a certain way. You have your oscillators, they go to a filter, they got an envelope, you got LFOs you can assign to things, they got FM usually, and they all work kind of in that way. And sometimes they'll be what's referred to as semi-modular, where you can kind of patch certain things around in certain ways, or change the order of some things. But for the most part, there is an order. But modular synthesis is the world where it's kind of like how we do digital stuff. It's the idea that there are these little modules that do a certain job that's present in that exists. There's a certain job that exists for synths. So, for example, here we have like the waveform thing. This is the thing that outputs the waveforms that make up the synth sounds. You know, saws, sines, triangles, blades, saw. Blade is just the inversion shape of a saw, and pulse, which is square wave. And then you have LFOs, and then you have mixers, and then you have gate creators, and filters, and then envelopes, and then amplifier, and then a mixer out kind of thing. This is to go back into something like that's regular. Modulars, by the way, used 1/8 inch cables because they're smaller. That's a 1/4 inch out right there, just to give you an idea of size, because this actually was a lot smaller than I thought it was in person. And there's a Midi Control. Now, this MIDI to CV thing is interesting. So CV, you know, so you say CV in, or whatever, that kind of thing. Everything, all of these things, relies on voltage, and it's sort of a system referred to as control voltage. And the whole point of this is that these things, like the waveform generators, the envelopes, the LFOs, they output voltage. They put out voltage, and they are interpreted as either output, which moves a speaker cone, or control voltage, which moves a parameter. And when they move a speaker cone, you hear a tone, that's fine. But when you put it in a parameter, it moves that parameter at that speed of the pitch. So if you put out an oscillator at 1 kilohertz, 1,000 hertz, 1,000 oscillations per second, and you put that on a filter thing, the filter module at, you know, you get your CV, it will move that parameter, you know, in a position at 1,000 times a second. Now, that, like, the density issue and the kind of the idea of resolution are reasons why that kind of thing just cannot happen in the digital world. But in the analog world, that does happen, and it creates just a super weird universe of overtones or whatever, that kind of thing. But here's something else. Like, you know, we can also do stuff like put it into volume and ring modulate something. We can put it in another oscillator and just FM it with another oscillator. Some oscillators have internal FM, or they have more than one oscillator. That just one is just there to FM stuff. Anything that is a CV input can accept an oscillator, and it will, or any signal. It doesn't have to be an oscillator. If it's the signal, it's voltage. It has to be the right level. Like, there's line level, and then there's amplitude, you know, amp to come out. And then there's instrument level, and then there's voltage, and there's a range, and there can be converters. That's why this MIDI converter thing exists, because the second these things have power, they are outputting sounds. These waveforms, these plugs, the sine, triangle, blade, saw, pulse, are all outputting things all at the same time. And it starts running, and it does not stop. It is going forever. And you control, to make it sound like you're playing a note and then it stops, you have to involve the envelope. To trigger the envelope, you have to involve the gate. To trigger the gate, you have to involve the triggers, which come out of here. So it says gates, channels, and this is where the MIDI comes from. And then in order to get pitch, you have to put it into the CV input of the thing. You have to have a quantizer. It has to quantize the pitch, the voltage. It's called 1 volt per octave, and that's probably able to sit here somewhere. Yep, there it is, 1 volt octave, which is to say that if you were having a tone, you wanted to play a higher octave, you'd play 1 volt more of power. And if you wanted to play a fifth, you play half a volt of power. If you want to play a third, you play a quarter volt power, that kind of thing. It's quantized to play the actual chromatic scale. And not just that, though. Certain modules exist that actually quantize into other scales, too, which is particularly cool. And for sequencing and randomization, that's actually the universe that SeamlessR result was pretty fascinating in, because like the most of his synth modulators were sequencers and randomizers and like other sort of input devices that in some way screwed with the signal to do things that you literally cannot predict, because it's not quite the digital randomness and sort of analog randomness are two very different animals. So like, in order to make all this stuff work, every individual aspect has to be accounted for by an actual module just to have the thing make sound. And it's a weird world. And all parts of that can all be oscillated and controlled by a signal. So like, for example, you could FM a signal by your voice. You could FM a filter with parameters of your voice, and it won't. You might notice if you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, I could do that with a free peak controller, where it reads the level of your input and then it controls the parameter based on the level of your input. And you're right, and you can make that pretty fast, but not 100% fast, not 1-to-1 with the motion of your voice perfectly without underruns or crackling or other bad artifacts. There might be other artifacts because it might just be a terrible idea, but if you did it, it'll do it to it 100% all the time, forever, and it won't break. There's no overloading. I mean, there's shit you can do to break the stuff, obviously, but like a regular signal path will always be flawless. It might sound awful, but that's up to you. So this enables you to have a universe of extremely interesting things. So the module that I was particularly fascinated with, out of his collection that I used another one called the Hertz Donut. If you watch the stream with him in it, he showed that off. But this is the one that I liked. This is the Make Noise Dbo, which it seemed to have been designed by default to sound like every drum and bass track made between 2003 and 2006. And if you know me, you know I'm all about that. See, that stuff was back here. And like, this isn't terribly processed. Like I mentioned, there are modules that have internal FM, and this is one of those modules that has internal FM. It has 2 oscillators. It can be output, and it is also this final output, which is a mix of a chain that it has built into it, which also involves not just the other oscillator FMing this oscillator, but also a wave shaper, a built-in wave shaper, and a whole bunch of other stuff, plus this strike thing, which we'll talk about in a second, and different mod. You can have external wave mod. It's fucking weird. And as it turns out, the way that wave shapers work in the analog world is actually somewhat different from how wave shapers work in the digital world, at least in the practice that I've seen. I have to do more analysis with actual hardware in my own studio for me to fully, formulate the differences, but they are quite interesting, and they do things that I've yet to. I mean, I look at the waveforms and I've yet to figure out how on earth I would do this with just regular wave shaping. Not to mention the modulation that happens. And this is all, this is basically directly out from that one module. I think I might have put it into a filter and then oscillated that filter with another oscillator. And then here's the kicker. I was manually moving the pitches around. These oscillators are not tuned. These oscillators are not quantized. This is just it's just putting it out, and I'm moving knobs with my hands. And this is what I meant earlier about the stuff being easy. Like, I just came to these sounds without a huge amount of processing. There's no compression. There's a little bit of compression because it ran before it went back into Cubase where it was being recorded. There was some limiters in the chain, hardware limiters to protect things. For the most part, though, this signal was unmolested, and it's just so many things you can do with it. Like, I've actually experimented with sort of throwing these into things and wave shaping them here and in the digital world. And that's something I am doing, by the way. I'm never going to be one completely with digital side or the analog side. I'm going to do both. And I'm going to do things with them in combination that can only be possible as such. I'm not going to be a purist one way or the other, although I may try to see what I can do with just analog stuff just to see what can happen. But for the most part, not going to be just both. Like, even in this business, and like, look at these. Like, just the movement. This is all me just moving knobs around and finding that sweet spot where it starts to reset a acceptable level. Because this kind of behavior comes from when you're FMing a bunch of stuff, but then you're FMing it by inharmonic amounts. Like, if we're talking about ratios and citrus or something like that, you FM a 2 ratio sound by a 2 ratio sound, it's going to be solid and static and unmoving and unchanging. But then if you change it to a 2.01 ratio, it's going to move a little bit and have kind of motion. Now imagine having 3 or 4 oscillators and they're all wildly different pitches. Not just like 2. We're talking like 2 and then like 60 and then like 13.04 kind of thing. It gets a little wild. But then if you're moving them around, every once in a while they kind of align at a harmonic pitch. And like, I don't even know what that pitch is because of the theory. I don't know which one's the bass. I don't know which one's the top. And at some point, it gets to the point where some of these tones are not supposed to be like the bass level. It's actually all very high pitched stuff. But because of the way that they're interacting with FM, it just comes out as a lower tone. Not only that, but you can introduce ring modulation anywhere you want in the chain. You can put it through a mixer, put the CV in from a pitch source, and voila, you've got ring modulation. And you can do the kind of stuff I do with Citrus at anywhere in the chain. It just does it. It's amazing. With any parameter, by the way, not just volume. You can also do that. I mean, this is the same thing. You know, it's just FM, sourced anywhere. That was a little bit painful. My bad. Look at this. And that's the thing that made that one table that I liked. This guy? No. This guy. That looks like a extreme hill zone in Minecraft. Obviously conformed to the format of wavetables. And this was just regular, normal sort of filter stuff for analog things, normal for analog things. Doing processes and creating sounds that I'm fairly certain you could find a way to make a reasonable facility of a lot of this stuff with digital things. I mean, my whole sort of career has been based around doing that. And for all I know, a lot of the stuff I've been attempting to emulate has been done with analog hardware. But while it would take a lot of work to do this digitally, it is easy with modular stuff. It is straight up easy to do. And for how easy it is and how much work some of the stuff is, I honestly believe that the expense is worth it. Like, I mean, obviously I do because I'm going to buy it, but not just because I'm in a position where I make enough money that I can afford this stuff. Like, people save up for computers that are about as expensive as the stuff that I want to get. People buy plugins that are about as expensive with the stuff I'm going to get. But I mean, to be totally honest, the plugins can do more because digital stuff is objectively better at their job. It's just that, you know, I already have the digital stuff. Like, if you want to compare the things that digital stuff can do, that only digital stuff can do versus the analog stuff that only analog stuff can do, digital can do way more. But everyone can do digital stuff. And like I said, you know, because of the sort of the limitation and how easy it is with this stuff, that kind of uniqueness that's almost inaccessible with digital things is almost worth having for the expense of analog hardware. And apparently the stuff's coming back. NAMM is this year, and I guess NAMM for this year, I think it was this year, or it might have been last year, but one of these years, it was the first year ever that synths had a larger presence on the floor than guitars, which is insane for what NAMM is. So, like, we might be seeing a bit of a price drop, but we also might be seeing kind of a rush for these things. And yeah, I mean, the DPO, that's what it's called. The Make Noise, the company is the name that makes it. Makes noise. Make Noise, oh my god. The DPO. This thing costs $600. But, like I said. And the filter I was using on this was a Korgasmatron, which is either a replica or a model or a stripped down, I think Korg does it, of the Roland MS-10, the Korg MS-10. Somebody's MS-10. It's apparently a really good filter, but like even regular normal filters can do this. Can do normal stuff. Like as Clayton refers to it, bread and butter filters can do this stuff. And you might be thinking, well, okay, cool, that's fine, but the form factor is ridiculous. And it is a little ridiculous. Like just the tactile nature of it is really cool. And like we have controllers and stuff to try and emulate that all the time, but just the signal pathing and the form factor required just to get this into somewhere where you can use it in a song is a little crazy. And that's one of those things that digital just does way better, and it always will, because it's convenient. But there exists a set of plugins made by a company called Expert Sleepers, whose whole purpose in life is to integrate with DAWs. And Clayton's super integrated studio system made heavy use of this. And they have a plugin suite that's designed to take control parameters from inside a DAW and output them as CV so that you can do things like automate from your DAW a piece of analog hardware. And also to actually input analog like automation into synths. Because there are some things that it's just a little bit hard to do, you know, with control. Actually, there's a couple of things I can think of right now that I want to try with that. But not only that, but so you can do something like it has a thing where you can send a signal out of your interface, and it'll convert it to the correct range to be CV. And so you could do something like create a shape in Citrus and use that to ring modulate a tone created by a synth. And it essentially is analog at that point because it's been converted from one type of signal into another to interact. And it's insane. All of this is insane. And it's honestly the future, weirdly. It's weird. It's weird that this is the future. But, you know, new modules are being made. It's not just all old stuff. It's not just people emulating old stuff either. Although the big thing about NAMM this year was that they're bringing back the Keith Emerson Moog module, which is a different kind of rack system than this stuff. And those were like meticulous recreations of the old hardware, and it's insanely expensive. But like these things are new, and like the DPO is new, and a lot of these things are still being made and made by hand by weird people in weird places, and they're brand new, and they keep making new stuff. So like, it's not like some dying old ancient industry that people are collecting $1,000 collector's items and making music out of. This stuff is more or less. It's not necessarily cutting edge, but it is kind of edgy. Yeah. So lots of cool stuff. The feature is weird. Wave tables for everybody. If you have any questions about any of this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.